Promises, 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 and all of them fulfilled. Is that what you think about promises? That people will keep them? Well, think about this. I heard a young lady on the news a few weeks ago promising her parents she wouldn't do anything dangerous. She was talking about her attempt at climbing Everest. Yes, I promise I'll keep my bedroom clean and clean it when I've had my tea. I've heard that one dozens of times. Do we keep our promises? I'm not sure that I do. The book of Exodus is a continuation of the book of Genesis. A book about the fulfillment of the promises made by God to Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob. God said in Genesis 12 to Abraham, I will make you a great nation. Then in Genesis 26, God repeats his promise to Isaac. And again in Genesis 28, God says these words in a dream to Jacob. I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac. I will give to you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like dust of the earth. You will spread out to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Now that's a promise. In the end chapters of Genesis, we have an amazing story of a dysfunctional family. The story of Jacob and his oh so wonderful sons. Joseph, the favourite son, has been sold into slavery by his brothers who hate him. And I mean they really hate him, enough to want him dead. But we read that God uses Joseph to bring the sons of Jacob into the land of Egypt. So we come to our Bible reading for today. Exodus 1, page 55 on in the Pew Bibles. You might find it helpful to follow it through with me. But I'm going to be following 3 headings for today. Oppressed yet blessed. The failure of the first genocide. And the birth of a liberator. So to my first heading, oppressed yet blessed. Jacob and his family of 70 have been welcomed into Egypt. They have been given their own land to dwell in and live in peace. Some 350 years plus have passed. And now we read that Jacob's descendants, the Israelites, have been extremely fruitful and have multiplied. Joseph's family of 70 have now become the nation Israel. Over the years, this peaceful relationship has turned into a relationship of oppression, enslavement, and forced labour. There is a new Pharaoh who frankly doesn't give a hoot that the Israelites have been welcomed with open arms into Egypt. All he sees is a nation that has got out of control, and he has got to do something about this invasion on his land. Verse 11 tells us that the Egyptians put slave masters over the Israelites to oppress them with forced labour. The welcomed Israelites now have slave masters dominating their every move, ruling them with an iron fist. This is hard labour. By no means is this a peaceful working relationship. This is a you do it or you die. It's not looking good for the Israelites. As slaves, there is no comfortable housing, very little food or water. They live and work in the heat of the desert. You half expect to read that the people dwindled in number to the point of near extinction. But that's not the case, is it? For verse 9 tells that the Israelites have become far too numerous. And verse 12, the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. The more they were oppressed. How is that possible if they are a nation living on the edge? Please listen as I read verse 9. Look, Pharaoh said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous. And if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies, fight against us and leave the country. There is fear within these verses. But what is surprising is that we don't read that it's the Israelites that are fearful. It's the great and powerful Pharaoh and the Egyptian nation who are fearful. And this fear in Pharaoh leads him to believe that by enslaving the Israelites and dealing with them shrewdly, this will somehow suppress the Israelite numbers. But he couldn't be further from the truth, could he? For we read, the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. And the Egyptians came to dread them. The more they were oppressed, it seems that the more they were blessed. The Israelites find themselves in a world that is cruel and vile. But it is a world that is not without God. God has made promises. They may have been made hundreds of years previous to this event, and he may have been silent for some time. But we read that God has been blessing his people through their oppression. In these pages, we are reading the beginning of God's fulfillment to the promises made to their forefathers. My second heading is the failure of the first genocide. We have been celebrating the centenary of the suffragette movement. Women who stood up to be counted, fought for what they believed was right, went against what was asked of them and what was expected of them. They were hated by men and women. They feared for their lives as they were threatened with violence, imprisonment, and even death. Here in these pages, we are told about courageous women, 2 midwives, who have been ordered by Pharaoh to kill any male babies born to Israelite women. But Pharaoh misses one little detail. These women fear God more than they fear him. Shiphrah and Puah go against Pharaoh, refusing to do as they have been commanded. This disobedience against the mighty Pharaoh shows extraordinary bravery and exceptional faith in God. Something important could easily be overlooked here. How important each person is to God. But let me put something straight. God does not need these 2 women to help him bring about his promise of making the Israelites into a great nation by saving the baby boys. He does not need them. He chooses to use them. God chooses to use these 2 women to hinder the plans of Pharaoh. 2 women against the might of Pharaoh, who, by the way, is not named. A Pharaoh who is an oppressor, a dictator, a bully. These 2 women are going against a powerful man who could have them killed at his whim for their disobedience. But again, we do not read that they feared the mighty Pharaoh. We read that they feared God. They only have a small part to play in God's plan, but it has huge consequences. Shiphrah and Puah have been swept up in God's plan to save his people. The first attempt at genocide has failed. This leads me to my 3rd heading, the birth of a liberator. Pharaoh steps up a notch. As I've said, this is a hazardous time for the Israelites. Verse 22 reads, Pharaoh gave this order to his people. Every Hebrew boy that is born, you must throw into the Nile. The second attempt by Pharaoh to kill the nation Israel. Pharaoh sees a nation that is multiplying like the proverbial rabbits. He sees a nation that is so big they could be a threat to the Egyptians. So the only way to rectify this in his tiny mind is to eliminate all the boys. Infanticide. But it was no accident that Moses was born at this time. For God had heard the cry of his people. He had a plan, and Moses was going to play a major part in it. The people are in bondage. 70 were invited to leave Canaan and live in Egypt. Now, up to 2 million people want to leave Egypt and return to Canaan, the promised land. The time is ripe. The Israelites have no rights. They are treated like animals. They are dehumanized. They have become objects rather than subjects. They need to regain their identity. They need to be liberated. They need someone who they can believe in, they can trust in, and put their faith in. Someone who will deliver what has been promised. Mahatma Gandhi, a scrawny little man, led his fellow Indian people to freedom. George Washington led the original fight for independence in the great US of A. And a century later, Abraham Lincoln set 3 million people free from the bondage of slavery. True liberators. So threatened was the ruthless Pharaoh that he ordered the Israelite boys to be slaughtered. Little does he know the result of his actions. Little does he know that the very river that he has ordered the baby boys to be drowned in will in fact wash up the Israelites sent by God to liberate his people. Little does he know that the very law that was started to eradicate the Israelites was about to bring forth their deliverance. In Pharaoh's household, an Israelite liberator is being educated, given the best the world has to offer, being nurtured, loved, brought up in the seat of power. Pharaoh's wisdom seems not to be so wise after all. God's promise is being drawn into action. In Genesis 46, God said to Jacob, "Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again." Centuries have passed. Perhaps for the oppressed, downtrodden people Israel, these words may have seemed like a distant dream that could not possibly be fulfilled. But we see in these passages that God is faithful to his promise. For the sons of Jacob have become a nation, and the nation in its oppression has been wonderfully preserved. The bravery of the few has proved that among the many there are those who fear God. And after the years of enslavement, and even before there is any thought of Moses, Israel is called to fear God above any ruler, above any nation, and above any circumstance or situation that they find themselves in. Pharaoh is out to kill the nation Israel. By attempting to kill all the boys, he is essentially attempting to eradicate God's creation. What he hadn't figured out is that God knows his people. and his people know him. Our God, the God of the universe, is no tyrant. He is not a dictator or an oppressor. He is not a God who will force you to follow him by dictating that you will do so. He is the God who hears the cry of his people. He is the God who has such an overwhelming love for his people that he would stop at nothing to save them. He will stop at nothing to release his people from the slavery of this world. Our lives echo that of the Israelites. We have become the children of the promises given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The promises made by God. I am with you, and I will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land, and I will not leave you until I have done what I promised you. We are the Exodus. Through belief in Jesus' life, death and resurrection, he is leading us, his people, to the promised land. We see the parallels of the story of the birth of Moses with the story of the birth of Jesus. Men wanting to destroy the male who threatens their leadership. We understand that this Old Testament story is a foretaste of what God will do in Jesus. The preservation of his people. In these chapters, we learn to understand the saving power of God. We have been caught up in this story. Our liberator is Jesus. For Jesus is the one through whom all people will be blessed. He is the one we can believe in, trust in, and have faith in. As we wait for the promise of Christ's second coming, we look forward, as did the Israelites, to a new heaven and a new earth, becoming a great nation in a new land. This is what Jesus' death on the cross promised to those who believe in him. As he took upon himself the sin of the world and made us clean. He died so that we do not have to. He died so that we may enter and live forever in the promised land. Amen.